A room full of stars, lights blazing, cameras rolling, and one man, calm, poised, holding the fate of everyone on that stage in his hands. Johnny Carson didn't just host The Tonight Show, he controlled it. But behind the laughter, there were moments of betrayal, unspoken rivalries, and confrontations that could ruin careers in an instant. Tonight, we uncover the stories no one dared tell. The guests who crossed the line, the friendships shattered on live TV, and the one night that even Johnny couldn't laugh off. With number 17, a story that still gets whispered among late-night insiders. It's about a comedian who came up in the early 80s, young, wild, a little too confident. He thought he'd win over Johnny with shock humor. Stuff that might have killed in a smoky club, but didn't fly on network TV. Midway through the set, Johnny's fake smile melted. He didn't interrupt, didn't lecture, just sat there stone-faced. The applause was polite at best. When the cameras stopped, Carson turned to his producer and said, "He's done." That was it. Overnight, the comedian's phone stopped ringing. And in showbiz, silence is death. Number 16 was a different kind of disaster. A soap opera star who thought her fame extended beyond daytime TV. She arrived with an entourage, refused to sit until her lighting was flattering, and called Johnny "sweetheart" on air. He laughed it off, but you could tell it bugged him. The kicker? She tried to take over the interview, turning it into a monologue about her beauty tips. When the show wrapped, Johnny reportedly muttered, "Never again." And true to form, she never got the invite back. Years later, she joked about it in an interview, said she didn't realize how seriously Carson took control of his stage. Maybe she realized too late that it wasn't her show. Number 15 brings us to a famous athlete. This one hurt because Johnny actually admired him, watched his games, cheered him on. But when the athlete came on The Tonight Show, he was arrogant, brushing off questions, making jokes at Johnny's expense. It wasn't playful, it was cocky. By the third minute, the crowd was uncomfortable. Afterward, Carson didn't even shake his hand. The next day, the athlete's PR team called to apologize, but the damage was already done. Funny thing is, that same athlete later admitted, "I didn't realize Johnny was the kind of man you needed to respect until it was too late." That line stuck with people. It said everything about the kind of power Carson had without even trying. Now, number 14. This one's legendary. A Hollywood golden boy, fresh off a blockbuster, thought he was untouchable. He waltzed onto the stage with sunglasses still on, feet up on the desk, acting like he owned the place. Johnny, being Johnny, gave him enough rope to hang himself. When the actor started flirting with the female band members, Carson hit him with that famous eyebrow raise and said, "You comfortable?" The audience laughed, but behind the scenes, that moment was a warning shot. The actor's agent got a call the next morning. He won't be back. That clip still makes the rounds online today. You can practically feel Johnny reclaiming his throne in real time. Number 13 is a bit sad. It's about a once-beloved TV personality who went through a public scandal. She came on the show hoping to repair her image, but instead of humility, she brought denial. Every question Johnny asked was dodged. Every apology felt rehearsed. And when he gently pressed her, she snapped, accusing him of trying to trap her. You could feel the audience pull back, second-hand embarrassment everywhere. Carson's face turned cold, and when the segment ended, he simply said, "Good luck," and turned away. That was the last time she ever appeared on any late-night show again. Sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you handle being called out. Number 12 is wild. A rock legend, yeah, that kind of legend, came on in the 70s completely unprepared. He slurred, cursed, and rambled about aliens. Johnny tried to save the interview, tossing him lifelines with humor, but nothing worked. When the show ended, Carson was livid. He reportedly told the producer, "If he's that drunk again, he's never walking through that curtain." The next time the rock star asked to come back, NBC declined due to scheduling conflicts. Everyone knew what that really meant, and yet fans loved the chaos. Funny how what kills your career can sometimes make you an icon. Number 11 takes us to one of Johnny's least favorite traits in a guest. Arrogance, masked as charm. This comedian, known for his wild laugh and over-the-top style, tried to turn The Tonight Show into his stage. He talked over Johnny, made digs about Carson's age, even leaned across the desk at one point like he owned the space. The crew said afterward that Johnny was fuming. He finished the show with grace, but that phone call never came again. Years later, the comic admitted, "I thought I was killing it. Turns out, I was killing my career." Brutal, but honest. And number 10, a politician. Oh boy. Carson hated political grandstanding, and this guest didn't get the memo. Instead of answering questions, he gave speeches. At one point, he even interrupted Johnny to correct him on a statistic. Johnny smiled that tight smile, the one that meant he was done pretending. After the segment, Carson reportedly told his producer, "That's the last campaign speech we host." And it was. The politician later lost his race, and people still say that awkward appearance might have sealed his fate. Now, number 9, and we're entering the elite zone of grudges. This was a fellow comedian, someone Johnny actually liked at first. But when the younger comic started doing talk shows of his own, he began copying Johnny's style almost word for word. Same cadence, same jokes, same hand gestures. When Johnny saw it, he wasn't amused. He called it cheap imitation. When the copycat tried to come back for a guest spot, Carson simply said, "Pass." Years later, when asked about it, Johnny said, "Everyone borrows, but some borrow the wrong things." That's the closest he ever got to admitting he was hurt. Number 8 was a famous author. Brilliant, but blunt. She came on to promote a book and started psychoanalyzing Johnny right there on stage. "You use humor as a shield," she said. The crowd laughed, but Johnny's eyes didn't. He played along for the rest of the segment, but off stage, he told a staffer, "Never let her near me again." She later claimed it was all in fun, but maybe that's the problem. Sometimes being funny means crossing a line no one else can see. Number 7. Now this one's darkly funny. A guest brought a parrot on stage for a cute animal segment. The bird, clearly nervous, squawked a string of curse words live on air. Carson froze, the audience howled, and the guest tried to cover it with nervous laughter. After the break, Johnny turned to the camera and said, "Well, that's one way to end a career." The line got a laugh, but behind the scenes, the poor guy never got booked again. The parrot, though? Apparently, it got a movie deal. Hollywood, right? Number 6 brings us to one of Carson's rare moments of on-air vulnerability. A beloved comedian, someone who'd been on the show dozens of times, made a cruel joke about Johnny's age, implying he was out of touch and should retire. Johnny laughed politely, but afterward, he stopped taking the comedian's calls. They never reconciled. When Johnny finally retired years later, that comedian wasn't even mentioned in his farewell episodes. That's how deep the cut went. One joke too far, and a 30-year friendship vanished. And here's number 5. A famous actress came on and decided to test the limits of live TV by flirting relentlessly. Not in a cute way, but in a pushy, uncomfortable way. She even tried to sit on Johnny's lap mid-interview. You could see him physically recoil. The crowd laughed awkwardly. The segment ended early, and Carson looked furious. Afterward, he said, "That's not comedy. That's disrespect." She later claimed it was all in fun, but her Hollywood invites dried up soon after. Goes to show, there's a fine line between charming and cringy. Number 4's a weird one. A children's TV host came on to promote his show, but treated Johnny like he was one of the kids. Condescending tone, goofy props, the whole bit. Johnny played along, but when the host patted his head like a child, that was it. "Thanks for stopping by," Carson said mid-segment, cutting it short. You could almost feel the collective gasp from the crew. That host never recovered from the embarrassment. To this day, fans call it one of the most awkward interviews in Tonight Show history. And then we reach number 3, the biggest shocker. A legendary actress, one Johnny had adored for years, came on after a long absence. Everything was fine, until she made a joke implying that Johnny's success came from his writers, not his talent. That stung. You could see it in his eyes. He smiled, nodded, but after that, he never invited her back. Ever. Hollywood insiders still talk about it as one of those career suicide moments. It's crazy how one offhand remark can undo years of goodwill. Number 2 might be the most infamous. A young stand-up comic, eager to impress, showed up drunk. He rambled, told half-finished jokes, and even tried to sit behind Johnny's desk. The audience laughed nervously, thinking it was a bit. It wasn't. Carson called for commercial early, then walked off stage without a word. That comedian's big break turned into a big mistake. Years later, he admitted, "That was the night I lost everything." Brutal honesty. But that's how late night worked back then. One bad night, and you were done. And number 1? Oh, it's personal. It wasn't a guest. It was a friend. A fellow TV host who once stood by Johnny through his toughest times. But then came the betrayal. An offhand comment to the press, calling Carson a relic of another era. It might have been a harmless jab, but to Johnny, it felt like a knife. Their friendship ended instantly. They never spoke again. When Carson passed years later, that friend reportedly broke down in tears, saying, "I wish I'd said sorry." That's the thing about grudges. They don't just silence others. They haunt you too. By the time The Tonight Show ended, Johnny Carson had built a fortress around himself. Every guest, every moment, every silence told you something about who he was. Brilliant, guarded, fiercely proud. Some say he was too sensitive. Others say he just demanded respect in a business that rarely gives it. But whether you loved or feared him, you couldn't deny this. Johnny Carson ruled late night like nobody else. And even decades later, his legend and his grudges still echo across Hollywood. So, what do you think? Was Johnny justified in holding those lines? Or did he let pride get the better of him? Maybe there's a bit of Johnny in all of us. The part that remembers every slight, every betrayal, every laugh that came at our expense. Maybe that's why his stories still hit so hard. Because behind every spotlight, there's a shadow. And Johnny's? It was bigger than life itself. At 17, there was that young comic who thought chaos was funny. It was the early 80s, and edgy humor was becoming the thing. He figured shock value was the fastest way to stand out. Johnny introduced him with his usual charm, but within minutes, the energy shifted. The guy dropped a few off-color jokes that might have worked in a dingy bar, but not in front of middle America. The crowd tensed. Carson didn't cut him off. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. The applause afterward was faint, polite, and when the cameras stopped, Johnny leaned toward the producer and whispered, "That's the last time." By the next morning, the comics agent was fielding cancellations. One audience member later said, "You could just feel Johnny's disappointment, like watching a dad watch his kid mess up on stage." Brutal, but it stuck. At 16, the soap opera star with the ego of a movie queen strutted onto the stage like it was her own show. She demanded a specific lighting setup before going on, and when Johnny joked about it, she smirked. "I just like to look perfect, Johnny." He smiled back, but everyone could sense the frost beneath the grin. The real tipping point came when she started giving Carson advice about charisma on live TV. "You should smile more," she said, tapping his arm. That crowd went dead quiet. Johnny just nodded, the ultimate poker face, and moved the show right along. The next morning, NBC's booking sheet had one less name on it. Years later, she tried to laugh it off in interviews. Said she never knew she'd offended him. Maybe she really didn't. Or maybe she just couldn't admit that Johnny Carson had made her invisible. Then came number 15, the athlete who forgot he was no longer in a locker room. Carson loved having sports stars on. It brought energy, loosened things up. But this guy came out swinging, mocking Johnny's golf swing, teasing him about his age, even interrupting a story about Muhammad Ali. The audience laughed nervously, unsure if it was playful or rude. After the taping, Carson skipped the usual post-show handshake. He just walked straight past him. The athlete later said in an interview, "I thought I was being funny. I didn't realize Johnny had a line you couldn't cross." And that was that. The story became a cautionary tale for every other guest who thought they could out-alpha the king of late night. Number 14. Now this one's infamous. A young actor fresh off a blockbuster hit. You could almost smell the arrogance before he sat down. He wore sunglasses indoors, feet casually thrown on Johnny's desk, oozing, "I'm the future." Johnny, calm as ever, just smiled. The audience giggled awkwardly, waiting for him to say something. Then came that moment. The actor made a flirty comment to one of the band members, and Carson leaned forward, raised that iconic eyebrow, and asked, "You comfortable?" The crowd erupted with laughter. It was subtle, but everyone knew Johnny had just taken back control. Backstage, the producers laughed it off, but Johnny was done. "He'll learn," he said quietly. And the actor did. Within a few years, his career fizzled. Some say it wasn't because of Carson, but let's be honest. When Johnny turned his back on you, the industry followed. Number 13 hurt a little to watch. A beloved TV personality, once America's sweetheart, showed up on the show trying to clean up after a tabloid scandal. You could see she was nervous, clutching her notes, trying to smile through it. But when Johnny gently asked her about the controversy, she got defensive. "That's not fair," she snapped. The audience murmured, uncomfortable. Carson stayed calm, but his tone turned icy. "I'm just asking what everyone else is thinking," he said, cool and composed. The rest of the segment dragged, awkward silence filling every pause. After the show, producers said Carson didn't even look at her. She later said she felt set up, but fans who rewatched the clip saw it differently. "Johnny gave her a chance to be human," one viewer wrote. "She chose to be defensive." Sometimes the audience sees more than the guest ever does. Number 12 is a story of pure rock and roll chaos. A legend, no names needed, showed up late, slurred his words, and started ranting about UFOs. The crowd was equal parts entertained and confused. Johnny tried to salvage it, joking, "I think we've made contact," but the guy just kept going. The producers nearly cut to commercial early. Afterward, Carson reportedly said, "If he walks in like that again, don't let him near the stage." The next time the rock star's publicist called, NBC told them there were no available dates. Translation, permanently banned. Fans still talk about that episode like it was some kind of fever dream. It was chaotic, yes, but it also showed how far Johnny would go to protect his show's image. He wasn't against wild energy. He just demanded professionalism underneath it. At 11, we've got a comedian who mistook The Tonight Show for open mic night. He thought if he could keep the laughs rolling, he'd impress Johnny. But instead of riffing with him, he talked over him. Constantly. Johnny tried to get a word in, only to be interrupted again and again. The audience caught on, groaning a little with every step on Carson's sentence. Finally, Johnny leaned back, smiled, and let him crash. It was like watching someone drive off a cliff in slow motion. After the show, crew members said Johnny was livid but composed. "He'll learn manners somewhere else," he muttered. And he did, because no other host would touch him for years. It became one of those industry don'ts people whispered about. Don't interrupt Carson. Ever. Number 10's a favorite among longtime fans because it mixed politics with pride. A senator came on to talk about his new campaign. Carson welcomed him warmly, cracked a few jokes about election season, but the guy didn't play along. He lectured. Interrupted. Corrected Johnny on national TV. You could almost hear the collective "oh no" from viewers. At one point, Carson said, "You'd be great on Meet the Press," with that half smile that everyone knew meant, "Get off my stage." Afterward, NBC made it clear they weren't hosting campaign speeches anymore. And that senator? He lost the election months later. Fans joked that Johnny had voted him out early. Whether that's fair or not, it shows the influence The Tonight Show carried. You didn't just entertain on that stage. You performed for America's living room. Now, number 9 is where things get personal again. A fellow comedian, one Johnny had helped early in his career, started hosting his own late-night show. The problem? He was basically doing Johnny's show. The same tone, the same phrasing, even the same guest style. Carson watched one episode and reportedly said, "I'm flattered. I think." When the younger host reached out about coming back on The Tonight Show to promote his show, Johnny said no. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was just final. Later, in an interview, he said, "Everyone borrows. Just don't borrow the soul." That quote hit hard for people who understood how much of himself Johnny had poured into that format. It wasn't ego. It was legacy. Number 8 was a respected author. The kind who prided herself on telling uncomfortable truths. She came on the show expecting to have a deep conversation about human nature. But about halfway through, she turned the lens on Johnny himself. "You hide behind your humor," she said, smiling like it was a compliment. The audience laughed nervously, but Johnny's eyes didn't. "That's why you're here," he said, voice calm but cutting. She laughed, trying to play it off, but the tension was there. Afterward, she told the press she hadn't meant to offend him, but the damage was done. People rewatched that clip for years, analyzing the body language, the subtext. Some said Johnny overreacted. Others said she crossed a line. Either way, she never appeared again. It's fascinating, isn't it? How a single sentence can change everything. By now, you can probably sense the pattern. Johnny's grudges weren't loud. They were silent, swift, permanent. Fans saw him as the calm eye of the storm, but insiders knew that calmness was power. One wrong move and you were erased without explanation. Viewers at home picked up on that too. Some admired it, said he was right to protect his show's tone. Others thought it showed how lonely the spotlight can be. A few fans even said they related to Johnny, that quiet, internal line between forgiveness and pride. "We've all been there," one person commented. Someone disrespects you in public and you smile. But inside, you're done. Maybe that's why these stories still feel so timeless. They're not just about Hollywood. They're about being human. Hey, if you're having a good time with this, giving it a like and subscribing means a lot. It's the simplest way to show a little love and help the channel grow. Seriously, it keeps this kind of storytelling alive. So, thinking about all this, do you think Johnny was protecting his show or his ego? And here's another one. Have you ever cut someone out of your life quietly, not out of anger, but out of self-respect? I'd love to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Because honestly, this story isn't just about Carson. It's about every one of us who's ever drawn a line and said, "That's far enough." Number 7 wasn't just another tense interview. It was a full-on showdown between Carson and a once-beloved comic who had burned every bridge in Hollywood. The guy had been a regular guest back in the day, always unpredictable, always funny. Until one night, he went too far. He made jokes about Carson's personal life, about his divorces, about his rumored affairs, right there under the hot studio lights. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or gasp. Johnny gave one of his famous pauses, that slow, careful inhale, before he'd deliver something sharp enough to make you wish you'd stayed quiet. "You know," he said, "I've had 3 wives, but none of them were as hard to get rid of as this conversation." The place exploded. The guest tried to recover, but Carson had already moved on, eyes back to the camera, professionalism restored. He didn't invite that comic back, and from then on, producers knew, mention Johnny's private life, and you're done. It was rule number 1. At number 6, it's one of the most uncomfortable episodes ever aired. The guest was a rock star turned activist, someone used to being adored, someone who thought controversy was charm. He came on during the height of his fame, wearing sunglasses indoors and speaking like the world owed him attention. Midway through the interview, he called Carson out of touch and said The Tonight Show needed younger blood. Johnny smiled thinly and replied, "Well, we were thinking about having you on more often, but the ratings department said otherwise." It was brutal. The audience roared, the rock star laughed, but his face said everything. Backstage, Carson reportedly told staff, "He wanted to make me look old. He just made himself look like a child." That clip's still floating around online, and even decades later, you can feel the chill in Johnny's voice. Then came number 5. One of those rare moments where you saw both the man and the myth collide. A famous director, brilliant but arrogant, had come on to promote his new film. He dominated the conversation, cutting Johnny off, explaining jokes that didn't need explaining, and even lecturing him about true comedy. Johnny let him dig the hole himself. And then, with that perfect, almost invisible shift in tone, Carson said, "You know, it's funny. You make movies about characters learning humility, but I guess directing it doesn't mean you've learned it." The audience howled. The director turned red. That night, viewers across America cheered for Carson. Because it wasn't just about one rude guest. It was about every boss, every critic, every loudmouth who never knew when to stop talking. Number 4 brings us to one of the saddest endings. A legendary actress, old Hollywood royalty, returned to the show after years away. She'd been one of Johnny's favorites in the early days, full of wit and class. But time hadn't been kind. She rambled, forgot stories, interrupted him mid-question. It wasn't ego, it was age. And for once, Johnny didn't fight it. He slowed down, gave her room, guided her like a dance partner who refused to let her stumble alone. At the end, she looked at him and said softly, "You always made me feel beautiful, Johnny." The crowd went silent. He smiled and replied, "That's because you still are." It was one of his final truly tender moments on the show. No grudge, no snark, just humanity. Viewers still write about that episode online, calling it the one that made me cry, and you can see why. At number 3, it's back to fireworks. A young hotshot comedian, wild, reckless, full of himself, got his big shot on The Tonight Show. He had 5 minutes. He made it count. But then, instead of thanking Johnny, he used his national TV moment to rant about how the old guard needs to retire. The audience booed. Carson, visibly irritated, ended the segment early. "And that," he said dryly, "is how you make sure this is your first and last visit." It became a defining clip, a brutal but necessary reminder that even comedy has etiquette. Years later, the comedian admitted that moment haunted him. "I thought I was being edgy," he said. "Turns out, I was just being stupid." There's something oddly satisfying about that kind of full-circle honesty, isn't there? Number 2. This one hurts. Because it wasn't about a bad joke or an ego trip. It was about friendship lost. One of Johnny's closest friends in Hollywood, a recurring guest who'd shared private dinners and golf games with him, came on the show right after signing a new deal with a rival network. Carson had no idea until the live taping. When he found out, in real time, you could see it. That tiny flicker in his eyes. Betrayal. The friend tried to joke about it. "Guess I'm finally competition, huh?" Johnny smiled, barely, and said, "Only if they start rating heartache." It was cutting and sad, all at once. The friendship never recovered. Viewers didn't know the full story then, but years later, crew members said that night was one of the few times they saw Johnny genuinely shaken. And now, number 1, the guest who broke him. The one moment that defined everything Carson stood for, and everything he tried to protect. It was a comedian known for pushing boundaries. Loud, brash, political. The audience loved him, but he came out swinging. Within minutes, he insulted the network, made inappropriate jokes, and even turned on Johnny. "You're just a corporate puppet," he said, laughing. The crowd gasped. Johnny stared at him. No smile, no comeback this time. Just silence. A long, heavy silence that stretched across every living room in America. Then quietly he said, "You think this is easy? Try being decent for 30 years. The room went dead still. You could hear the air move. The guest shifted uncomfortably, realizing he'd gone too far. That episode ended early. Johnny walked off the set. And that was it. The line that couldn't be uncrossed. The aftermath was explosive. Newspapers dissected every second of that exchange. Fans wrote letters defending Carson's dignity. Some argued he should have fought back with a joke, but most admired the restraint. "He showed more strength by saying less," one columnist wrote. And that, honestly, sums up his entire legacy. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room. He didn't need to be. His power came from silence, from precision, from knowing exactly when to step back and let the moment speak. Audiences never forgot those final confrontations. They replayed them, analyzed them, debated them for decades. People said things like, "He stood up for class," when no one else would, or "He reminded us that comedy doesn't have to be cruel to be powerful." Others saw themselves, in him, the tired professional trying to stay calm, while someone else loses control. That's what made Johnny Carson timeless. He wasn't just a performer. He was a mirror. And as the credits rolled on his final episodes, you could feel it. That bittersweet mix of nostalgia and loss. The Tonight Show wouldn't be the same again. The laughter, the grace, the quiet command. All gone with him. But maybe that's the beauty of it. He left before the magic faded. He ended the story his way. Not with a scandal, not with a meltdown, but with a bow and a simple, perfect goodbye. So here's what I want you to think about as we wrap this up. When someone disrespects you, do you fight back or take the high road? And more importantly, in a world that celebrates outrage, do you think quiet dignity still holds power? I'd love to know your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. Tell me which Carson moment stuck with you the most, and what it says about our own ways of handling pride and pain. And hey, if this deep dive into late-night legends hit you in the feels, don't forget, giving this a like or sharing it with someone who loves old-school television helps keep these stories alive. Johnny might be gone, but the lessons he left behind, they're still right here, waiting for us to listen. Beyond confrontation, Carson's most lasting moments often came from empathy and restraint. Look back at that legendary actress who'd struggled with age and memory on camera. Many hosts would have either cut her off or tried to salvage the segment with jokes. Not Carson. He slowed, guided, allowed space, and reminded viewers that dignity isn't measured by punchlines. That episode has become something of a blueprint for anyone trying to handle difficult situations with grace. Not just on television, but in life. The quiet acknowledgement that someone deserves respect, even when they falter, is powerful. And yet, it's fascinating how Carson's patience had limits. He was a man who could laugh at almost anything, but disrespect, personal, professional, or moral, was where the line was drawn. That episode with the rock star, the one who called him out of touch, is a perfect example. Johnny didn't yell or berate. He responded with a razor-sharp mix of humor and authority. "We were thinking about having you on more often, but the ratings department said otherwise." That sentence did everything. It was witty. It exposed the guest's arrogance, and it reminded everyone that Carson controlled the narrative. It's a reminder that power is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, precise, and devastating. Even in lighter moments, the lessons were clear. Consider how he dealt with guests who tried to hijack the show with self-importance. Directors, comedians, actors, even reporters. Those who tried to dominate conversation were often humbled not through confrontation, but through subtlety. Johnny could make someone realize their own folly simply by listening, smiling, and then delivering a single sentence that cut deeper than any insult. It's a lesson in the art of influence. Let people expose themselves, then guide the audience's attention to the truth. Beyond the audience and the guests, the behind-the-scenes implications of these confrontations are worth noting. Carson's staff knew the boundaries. Producers learned quickly. Don't let guests wander into personal territory. Writers understood that timing, subtlety, and precision were everything. These incidents weren't just moments on television. They shaped an entire ecosystem of professionalism. The Tonight Show ran like a well-oiled machine, partly because Carson treated it as a stage where chaos could happen, but only under his terms. The lesson extends far beyond TV. Leaders in any field understand the difference between control and domination, between patience and passivity. Then there's the human side. The cost to Johnny himself. All the restraint, all the carefully measured humor required emotional discipline. The friend who defected to a rival network episode is a glimpse behind the curtain. Carson had invested real trust, time, and care into that friendship. Seeing the betrayal on live television, he had to maintain composure for the millions watching. But the flicker of hurt in his eyes, that was real. It reminds us that even someone as polished and seemingly invulnerable as Johnny Carson felt disappointment, betrayal, and sadness. And yet, he chose to honor the professionalism of the moment over personal venting. That's a lesson in maturity few of us fully grasp until we're faced with our own public reckonings. And then, of course, there's the cumulative effect of all these moments. Each confrontation, each subtle correction, each act of empathy or restraint added to the legend. The Tonight Show became more than a talk show. It became a masterclass in human behavior under pressure. Guests who had experienced or witnessed Carson's handling of situations carried the memory forward. Viewers, too, internalized the lessons that dignity matters, that restraint can command more respect than aggression, and that humor doesn't need cruelty to be powerful. It's easy to forget the cultural context. Television in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s was a much different world. Live broadcasts meant mistakes were permanent. Celebrities wielded enormous influence, and many thought a national platform gave them license to overstep. Carson, in navigating this terrain, became a model not just of comedic skill, but of psychological intelligence. He understood perception, he understood timing, and he understood consequence. That's why, even today, clips of these episodes resonate. They're more than nostalgia. They're lessons in human behavior, leadership, and ethics. We also can't overlook Carson's humility. Despite all the power he wielded, he rarely displayed arrogance. He could shut down a brash comedian or a disrespectful actor, but he never seemed to enjoy the humiliation. It was about balance, preserving dignity for himself and the audience, while teaching a subtle lesson to the transgressor. That's an unusual form of power, one that relies on respect rather than fear. And in reflecting on these moments, you start to see patterns in human interaction that extend far beyond the TV studio. The loud, brash personalities that clash with steady professionalism. That's life in boardrooms, classrooms, family gatherings. The temptation to retaliate when insulted? That's universal. Carson's method, measured response, subtle humor, and quiet assertion, becomes a manual for how to navigate not just fame, but conflict in any arena. As we think about The Tonight Show's final episodes, it's striking how deliberate Carson's exit was. He didn't leave amid scandal or ratings decline. He left on his own terms, preserving the integrity of the show and the lessons it had imparted. In doing so, he made a final silent statement about control, timing, and dignity. He reminded viewers that true influence isn't about noise. It's about the cumulative weight of actions taken with precision and care. Finally, there's the emotional resonance. Watching those confrontations today, decades later, you sense more than comedy. You sense life. You sense disappointment, pride, humor, kindness, anger, and sadness, all managed within a single man's poise. That's why Carson's legacy endures. He wasn't just funny. He wasn't just a host. He was a lens through which we could see human behavior in its rawest, most fascinating form. So, when we think about Carson's toughest guests or his most unforgettable moments, we're really thinking about lessons in life, not just television, lessons in patience, dignity, power, and empathy. And in a world increasingly dominated by outrage, by instant reaction, and by attention-seeking behavior, perhaps there's something revolutionary about the quiet strength of a man who simply knew when to speak and when to remain silent.
Political parties are in the middle, conservatives and liberals, and they all seem to have different answers as to what is going wrong in the country. Some people say, well, let's let the government spend